Okay, well, welcome to our 2022 annual energy forecasting meeting, virtual again this year. Hope to be live next year. We had a great morning session. You want to roll to the next slide? Oh, that's right, we were going to do this. I already forgot. So if you haven't sent in a picture, please go ahead and send me pictures. We've got Joanna and Mike, and let's see if I can remember everybody's name off the top of my head. Joanna from Roseville, Mike Marler from Georgia Power, Brad Lawson, Electricities, Dr. Schill from Ameren. That was a picture taken in 2019 at our Boston meeting with Andy and Laura Ortega. Thanks to Nathan for sending in a picture, and Hong Yun Sheng from SCE. Todd Mobley, Duquesne, Jacob Watson, EKPC. I'm down in the corner again with Shannon and some other friends of ours. Those are Jay Lundstrom's feet hanging out at his pool. And if you were with us this morning, you heard from Paul Bogenreiter. But send your pictures in so you can be part of the wall of fame here. So we had a great morning with Ryan Sweet and the Economic Outlook. The recording will be available for that soon. And now we're going to roll into the second half of our day here with Kevin Jarzamos. I can't say it. Can't say it. Not coming. And then we have 2 sessions on Thursday, and then another session on Friday that we hope that you'll all join us for. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Eric to introduce Kevin.
Well, thank you. Want to just go move it to the next slide. Kevin Jarzomskis from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and I have been told, and I've got this now, that whenever you put the Energy Information Administration, you have to put U.S. Energy Information Administration. Kevin is a seniors buildings energy and consumptions and efficiency analyst. He has got to have the longest title of any analyst I know, but that's all good because he does a lot of stuff. Kevin is core to our work. Without Kevin and EIA and what they do, there wouldn't be an EFG or SAE spreadsheets. Stuart talked a little bit more about that, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. Kevin has a bachelor's degree in energy, business, and finance from Pennsylvania State University. And he is, really awesome to work with. If you have questions about, things coming out of the EIA, he's a great contact. And next slide.
Hey, Kevin, what's your dog's name?
Oh, yeah, I didn't see the dog.
Oh, yes, that is Peggy. She's a Scottish deerhound, or I like to refer to her as a horse wolf. She's big.
Peggy, I like that. So there's some things I want you to think about as Kevin goes through his presentation. For EFG members who use the SAE spreadsheet, their forecast really is going to drive at least the long-term part of your forecast. Earlier slide, Stuart put up a slide talking about kind of the SAE in-use modeling framework, and I copied that little equation over there. The use per customer equals the saturation of an end use, how big they are, and the utilization and efficiency. And the utilization part is really kind of the things that drive it in the short term: economic activity, prices, weather. And we had Ryan Sweet from Moody's talking about the economics, the utilization part of it. And Kevin today is going to be talking about the structure, the saturations and efficiencies and technology trends. So things I want you to think about as we go through these things is really in terms of your own average use across both residential and commercial classes. Is it declining? Is it flat, or is it increasing? And what are the factors kind of driving those trends? Things like certainly driving usage lower over the long term has been increasing end use efficiency, housing mix, increase, decrease in average square footage being driven by change in mix of multifamily, single family, increasing end use saturations, electric water heating, increasing miscellaneous sales, behind the meter solar adoption, increase, decrease in utilization on the use part, things like increasing temperatures and economic activity, and state and federal energy policy, energy efficiency, electrification, renewable targets, greenhouse gas limits. All these are ultimately going to be affecting the trend and long-term saturations and efficiencies. So with that, Kevin, it's your show.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Eric, for that setup. Let me get my slides here. Everything look okay?
Looks good.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks again, Eric, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Kevin Jarzomski, and as a reminder, EIA, the U.S. Energy Information Administration, collects, analyzes, and disseminates independent and impartial energy information to promote sound policymaking, efficient markets, and public understanding of energy and its interaction with the economy and the environment. My interest and yours today is buildings, so let's get started. Today, we're going to start with an overall highlight of some of the key takeaways from the AEO 2022, which was released in March, at the beginning of March. I will also add some additional side case context. It's always important to remember that the AEO is more than just the reference case. We do have these additional side case sensitivities, and we always encourage you to take a look at those as well. I'm also going to take a look at a quick look at how EIA accounts for the COVID-19 pandemic in the AEO 2022, and I'll briefly discuss the effects of Russia's further invasion into Ukraine. The rest of the presentation will be spent looking at residential and commercial drivers and the projections as we see here. And of course, there'll be the time for questions and discussion at the end. So to begin with, I want to remind everyone that we froze our models in December of 2021. So the AEO 2022 projections that we are discussing today are based on the assumptions and the data that were available at that point in time. That includes any laws and regulations that were in effect or scheduled to go in effect at that point. And as always, the AEO reference case includes current laws and regulations. So at the time we completed our modeling, we were using EIA's we used EIA's short-term energy outlook, or STIO, to capture the 2021 to 2022 effects of the pandemic on consumption for the different energy use sectors. All of which, of course, was prior to Russia's further invasion of Ukraine. So if you would like to look at EIA's latest monthly forecasts of how the pandemic and the changes in global energy markets are affecting U.S. energy consumption, you can refer to the current release of the STIO at eia.gov/STIO. But given the general uncertainty in energy supplies, prices, and activity, AEO 2022 includes these various sensitivities, these core side cases that we produce with each AEO. It's important to remember we have not made any really systemic changes to our modeling of the residential and commercial building sectors as a result of COVID-19 as far as what we're projecting for, say, housing stocks and commercial building floor space or end use consumption specifically. We do capture historical energy consumption from EIA's various energy supply surveys. But there's a lot to be seen still, even on our third year of pandemic, what the ultimate long-term effects of the pandemic will have been and will be through 2050 in our projections. But for the housing stock and the commercial floor space, we get those projections from IHS Markit's macroeconomic projections. There's a lot of words on these next couple slides. These are the key takeaways that were shared during our AEO release at the beginning of March. So I do encourage you to take a look at the the AEO page at eia.gov/AEO, where you can read more about these and the supporting details for these key takeaways that affect the U.S. energy sector as a whole and the various energy sectors. But according to the AEO 2022 reference case, petroleum and natural gas remain the most consumed energy sources in the U.S., while renewables are growing the fastest. Renewables make up much of the new electricity generation capacity, while coal and nuclear shares decrease. At the same time, purchased electricity consumption in the U.S. is growing about 0.7% per year from 2021 through 2050. Lastly, crude oil production reaches record highs, while natural gas exports are increasingly driving domestic natural gas and petroleum production. But again, I encourage everyone to take a look at the AEO webpage. There's a lot of great information there. You can actually watch the recorded release of the AEO and view some of our different chart libraries for the different sectors as well. So now I'm going to turn to the buildings related projections for AEO 2022. As we see here, the different consumption by different fuels for residential and commercial buildings. There are a number of things driving electricity growth, decreasing electricity prices, increased space cooling, population shifts to warmer part of the US, more electric devices in buildings. Here we can see that delivered energy consumption in buildings is growing slowly at about 0.3% per year from 2021 through 2050 in the reference case. But despite continued growth in population, numbers of households, and the amount of commercial floor space, delivered energy consumption growth is offset by energy efficiency improvements, increasing adoption of distributed generation technologies, and of course, there's regional population shifts as well. But for residential and commercial electricity sales, they're growing with increased demand for different electric appliances, devices, and equipment. In the reference case, electricity sales increased 0.7% per year in the residential sector and 0.5% per year through 2050 in the commercial sector. And that's electricity accounts for 51% and 53% respectively delivered energy consumed in 2050 for the residential and commercial sectors. Let's see, move Eric out of the way there. Commercial natural gas grows 0.2% per year through the projection, led by increases in water heating, cooking, CHP for on-site generation, combined heat and power for on-site generation. Residential natural gas use is falling by 0.1% per year as demand for space heating continues to decline. And of course, there's that same decrease in demand in the commercial sector as well.
Evan, can I interrupt? This is Rich. We have a question that says, how do you justify a decreasing energy rates outlook?
Decreasing energy rates outlook. I'm not quite sure.
I think he's thinking declining electric prices.
Right.
That's my interpretation as well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, our energy prices, those are more or less inputs to our residential and commercial building models. Those are the mix of generation and the costs associated with distribution, and all of those costs are all baked into our supply side models. As far as I don't do any justifying of specific fuel prices here, but you know, I welcome you certainly to take a look at the AEO page to read more specifically about what is driving like the generation mix, transmission and distribution, things like that.
Yeah, you also got to remember this was before the Russian invasion.
Yeah, that's an important thing to keep in mind throughout this entire conversation. And again, that's one of those situations where our side cases that we release with each AEO can give you a glimpse into how things might be otherwise, given those sensitivities for different macroeconomic growth, high and low macroeconomic growth, high and low oil and gas supply or oil prices. So that's where the AEO 2022 is the sum of its parts, and greater with the sum of its parts here, because we have those side case sensitivities that build beyond what the reference case shares. So I encourage you to take a look at those. Let's see. Okay. So now we're going to start looking at some of the demand drivers. Speaking of the fuel prices. Here we can see that the price declines that we were seeing in 2020 during the initial wave of the pandemic now increase going due to recovery, ongoing recovery in 2021 through 2023. The AEO 2022 reference case electricity prices rebound following that initial pandemic decline, but are projected to fall somewhat in the near term. But on average, residential electricity prices decrease 0.1% per year through 2050, while commercial prices decrease 0.4% per year through 2050. Of course, utilities are continuing to replace older and more costly power plants with new plants that are less expensive to build and operate, and that's contributing to lower prices. And the lower prices are contributing to the additional consumption in the near term in our models, but in both sectors, as we were looking at in the previous slide. But natural gas prices in both the residential and commercial sectors remain relatively flat in the long term, with about 0.2% per year commercial growth through 2050 in the reference case, and averaging about 0% growth from 2021 through 2021 through 2050 in the residential sector. But as I mentioned earlier, and as we all know, it remains to be seen what the long-term implications of the current global natural gas price fluctuations will be, because there's some things that we just can't account for here. Now, in addition to fuel prices, major drivers of consumption in buildings is weather. So here we see the heating and cooling degree day projections by each of the 9 US Census divisions. And in general, EIA uses a 30-year linear trend of historical heating and cooling degree day data by state, which is then population weighted to the US Census division level.
Kevin, can I interrupt for just a second? This
Go ahead.
question just came in. I think it was based on the last slide. It says, looks like these are real prices. Is that correct? In 2021 dollars?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So let's see where we're anyway, so then most notably here, the increase in cooling degree days in all census divisions you can see on the right. So in general, we have this decreasing heating demand, increasing cooling demand, demand for space heating from fuels such as natural gas, distillate fuel oil, propane, electricity is decreasing through 2050, while that consumption for space cooling, electricity is increasing. But as a result of those population shifts around the country that we'll see a little bit more of actually in the next section, overall US heating demand is decreasing and cooling increasing as the US population kind of shifts around to warmer parts of the country, like in the South and the West. But in general, though, this for AEO 2022, historical weather data includes NOAA's weather data through September of 2021. We have NOAA's near-term forecast through 2022, and then we use that 30-year trend of historical data through 2050. I also want to point out that there will be an issues in focus report that we will be publishing that will discuss alternative weather assumptions and the effects that kind of varying heating and cooling degree days will have on consumption in the building sector, and that will be published to EIA's website hopefully in the next month or so. So here we can see the different building types and where they're located across the US, and also the population. The number of US households increases about 0.7% per year through 2050 in the reference case. Single family homes are growing the fastest at 0.8% per year. Multifamily is growing at 0.6% per year. And then mobile homes are actually decreasing about 0.1% per year through 2050. But the US population is increasing from 332 million people in 2021 to about 376 million in 2050.
Kevin, before you go on, there's a question, I think, from the last slide. Are the west, south, central cooling degree days increasing by 2050 due to increasing temperatures or increasing population, or both?
Yeah, again, these are population weighted. So as more people are coming to the area, that'll increase that, and then also the just the historical trend of NOAA weather data would show that increasing cooling degree day trend. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So another thing to keep in mind over time here is that housing units are continuing to grow in size. The average floor space per home is increasing about 0.3% per year from 1,789 square feet in about 2020 through 1,960 square feet in 2050. And of course, where those homes are located will have an effect on how large they are, and the data here we see the shaded areas represent the range of floor space, with the largest housing units at the top and the smallest housing units by housing type on the bottom there, with the floor space weighted average or housing unit weighted average there in the middle. So in general, though, the Pacific Census Division has the smallest housing units based on our analysis of U.S. Census Bureau's survey of construction data. So that's what we use to make our projections of average housing size, taking that data and applying that to the average household size that we get from EIA's residential energy consumption survey, and then growing that over time. But in the weighted average single family household or housing unit rather, is growing about 16% over the projection period. Multifamily is growing about 1%, and mobile homes growing about 4% from 2021 through 2050.
Hey, Kevin, I have a question kind of related to this. Another key input is the improvements in the thermal shell. So we see square footage here increasing on average 0.3% per year. What's happening on the flip side in terms of thermal shell efficiency improvements?
So we do have, as you know, there's improvements in shell efficiency based on new construction, and different, and our models allow for different new construction performance of housing shells, whether it's a code built home or an Energy Star or a kind of Max Tech sort of construction practice. For existing construction, there's there would be improvements due to weatherization, also as renovations occur. If additional floor space is added, the new homes might be required to meet more stringent building codes. So, I mean, there's improvements associated with kind of those increases in floor space as well.
Is that increase in efficiency larger than the increase in square footage overall?
I don't have that right in front of me, but I think
What's your feel?
my speculation would be that the increase in efficiency is probably greater than the increase in the floor space growth.
That kind of makes sense. At least what I see from around here, but then I'm up in the Northeast, so.
And of course, all of this can vary from census division to census division, from state to state, from city to city. One important thing to keep in mind for our projections, our building projections, is that we are modeling at the U.S. Census Division level. And we do have some, like the heating and cooling degree day data that we do population weight from the state level. Ultimately, our models are operating at the Census Division level. So there are some policies that it's just difficult to capture at those levels. And also there's no federal building energy code. So those can vary from state to state, municipality to municipality. So there's a lot going on there.
Thank you.
Sure. So on the commercial side, we see here that commercial floor space is growing by about an average of about 1% per year in the reference case through 2050, reflecting kind of rising economic activity. But some of the fastest growing building types, including healthcare and lodging, are also among the most energy intensive. But in general, total floor space is increasing from about 94.4 billion square feet in 2021 to 127.1 billion square feet in 2050.
So at this point, you haven't really factored in how EIA working at home and not going back to the office ever is going to impact floor space growth?
Well, that's all to be determined. We are but a drop in the bucket, but it's there's a lot of businesses that will be doing the same thing, and those are the sorts of things that we are really keeping our eyes on going forward. In future EIA surveys, both the ones that capture the historical energy consumption by fuel type, and also EIA's energy consumption surveys, such as the Residential Energy Consumption Survey, REX, and the Commercial Buildings Energy Consumption Survey, CBEX. Those we will continue to capture kind of the changes in energy use, end use energy use, in our subsequent surveys here. And for instance, the 2020 REX characteristics data, we're starting to publish that, and that's the first EIA energy consumption survey that begins to capture the effects of the pandemic, because that data was collected for 2020. So it's really interesting, and we'll learn more over time.
Yeah, it's amazing. You look in Boston, they're still building buildings, so
yeah,
it's going up.
Kevin, there's a question that's just come in. I think I know the answer, but rather than me give the answer, I think I'll leave it to you. What about utility-sponsored DSM programs? Can you talk about how EIA accounts for the impact of utility-sponsored energy efficiency programs, both historical and projected programs, in the AEO?
Sure. So in the case of utility incentives, that we account for the reduction in installed cost of equipment, and we use different data sources to get a sense for kind of the average cost reduction for a piece of equipment by type. So say a natural gas furnace versus an air source heat pump, or any sort of equipment for which there are rebates. And again, we're modeling at the census division level, so we apply these percent reductions to reduce the cost of more efficient equipment like your Energy Star or higher performance equipment. And then our models can then choose those equipment types compared with your standard equipment or your less efficient, less expensive equipment. So every year we try to capture updated information about ongoing utility rebates programs. And in the case of lighting, for instance, which is tend to be more mature programs, we assume that over the next several years, say residential lighting programs would be kind of phasing out, because the low hanging fruit generally has been grabbed there. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, thank you.
Great. So now we're looking at the energy intensity for residential and commercial buildings here. Residential energy intensity is in terms of annual energy usage per household, and commercial is usage per square foot. So in the reference case, we see that the residential intensity for delivered energy, it decreases 14% from 2021 through 2050. And in the commercial sector, that's decreasing 17%. And that's as the number of households and floor space grow faster than energy use in the sectors. But some of the main factors contributing to these declines include gains in equipment and appliance efficiency, partly as a result of those utility-sponsored programs and federal incentives for more efficient equipment, but also the lower space heating demand, and increased on-site electricity generation from technologies like solar photovoltaics. We see here the purchased electricity intensity is increasing some in the residential sector, and it's decreasing less than total delivered energy intensity in the commercial sector because of adoption of additional electric end uses. And we will look at that on the next slide.
Kevin, just to clarify
Mhm.
for some people, so when you say purchase versus delivered, the delta is basically behind the meter solar?
Purchased electricity is electricity purchased from the grid. Delivered energy includes purchased electricity, but it also includes natural gas and other. So delivered, on-site generation for own use, self-generation, that is not included here.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll show some more about that in a few slides. But anyway, on the left here, we see how the different residential major energy end uses, such as space heating and space cooling, are changing over time. With less space heating demand and improvements in efficiency, we see the reductions in the space heating consumption. And with more cooling demand, despite increases in efficiency, there's obviously increased space cooling consumption over time. The bottom bars on the graphs on the left represent miscellaneous electric loads, and those, as they are called, they are a variety of end uses that we both can and can't fully characterize. And that's what kind of makes these projections of electricity consumption difficult, because we don't know every last electric end use that is that people are using in buildings. So in the as you can see on the right here, we see that there's decreases in consumption for like electronics, televisions and related equipment, PCs and related equipment, because they're they're mature technologies that have just been improving. And for televisions, that's despite the fact that TVs are getting larger and larger in size. But there's additional adoption of pool pumps, pool heaters, spas, things like that in different parts of the country, and where in the last 10 years ago smart speakers were barely a thing, and now they're in tens of millions of homes. So so there's a lot of additional end uses that are going into buildings. And these are some of the ones that we explicitly characterize based on contractor reports. There's a link to that at the end of the slides, and I'm sure you'll these will be shared with you, so you'll be able to click on those links. But for the end uses that we don't explicitly have data for, these other MELs, if you will, those we assume grow at the rate of disposable income, because presumably as people have more disposable income, they're buying more things, they're using things more, and so that's how we account for those. And then you think about the end uses that weren't always electrified but are increasingly electrified. Think of a toothbrush, for instance, that before was no power required. So now they have Bluetooth enabled toothbrushes, and I am guilty of that myself. But
That's
on the
pretty cool.
yeah, it's very informative.
I have a
Maybe
question.
overly so.
A question came in from on this slide. The way it's
Sure.
worded, it seems like EIA does not foresee widespread heating electrification.
I mean, I guess that's to be determined. I know the technologies for heat pumps are changing a lot over time, and or have changed, and the incentives to further electrify are still kind of changing. So those are some of the incentives, like utility incentives, and if federal incentives, additional federal incentives become available, we'll incorporate all of that, and that would help to determine what kind of rate of electrification might occur. But these projections are based on what's happening with fuel prices, with technology performance, based on what we see is currently available, and what contractors think the equipment performance might be based on current research and development. So that's all of that can certainly change, and we'll see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I have seen, at least in the New England Census Division, increase in heat pump saturations over the last 2-3 forecasts, where before there was nothing. Now it's not insignificant. And then on top of that, you have states like Vermont and New York that have a big electrification programs, and so they are subsidizing increase in heat pumps. So that's I think you're picking that up in some of the stuff that I'm seeing now.
Yeah, and every year, every AEO, we kind of benchmark to the equipment going into new construction via that U.S. Census Bureau's survey of new construction. So, all the new electric homes that are being built, we'll capture them that way. Every time we update our annual energy outlook models to the latest residential energy consumption survey and commercial buildings energy consumption survey, we'll capture the more of those sorts of trends as well. So it's as we get more data, we'll see how that changes the shares of equipment and consumption and everything. But there are different ways that we're pulling that in. So on the commercial side, some of the similar things, space cooling demand, space heating demand, being driven by heating and cooling degree days. But also in the commercial sector, we see increases in like data centers and your IT and related equipment. And then also for kind of non-building energy uses that are associated with the commercial sector. So wastewater treatment and cell phone networks. There's a lot of development of the next generation of cellular networks. So all of that kind of falls into this non-buildings but commercial end use consumption here. And then again, where we have these the other MELs, the end uses that we can't explicitly characterize, those are growing based off of service sector growth. So consider it more commercial transactions and everything driving additional consumption in commercial buildings. So Eric, back to your comment earlier about on-site generation, self-generation. Here we see that, again, electricity consumption in the residential sector is growing about, and this is total consumption in the residential sector is growing about 0.9% per year from 2021 through 2050, while the commercial electricity consumption grows by 0.7% per year. But here we see the growing adoption of distributed generation leads to more on-site generation for own use. And so that on-site generation is offsetting purchases from the grid, your purchased electricity. Here we see that distributed renewables and combined heat and power are growing by about 4 to 6% per year in the reference case in the commercial and residential sectors, respectively. So, and again, I will point out our AEO side cases. Actually, I will point that out in this slide, where we can see how solar PV capacity varies across our AEO side cases. By 2050, in the reference case, grid-connected end-use solar PV accounts for 12% of US generation. Residential solar PV capacity increases by about 6% per year through 2050 in the reference case, and commercial PV capacity is increasing on an average of 5% per year. But not surprisingly, concerns driving the adoption of PV differ between the residential and commercial sectors. Commercial responds a bit more to the capital costs and the payback periods, while residential accounts for disposable income and kind of social influences, seeing what your neighbors are doing, and in as much as that drives adoption. Here, though, especially on the right side there, you can see a little bit of a kink in the commercial PV capacity, and that reflects the expiring investment tax credits. Current ITCs reduce the installed PV cost by 26% through 2022. In 2023, this drops down to 22% of the installed. And in 2024, residential ITCs are scheduled to end, while the commercial ITCs continue at 10% going forward. But
Kevin, here is another question. Does the cost of self-generation, excuse me, hang on, approximate the NREL ATB outlook?
We do use the NREL annual technology baseline in our assumptions for developing projected solar PV costs. So we use, so they have multiple levels of cost. Ultimately, cost declines over time, but we use those growth rates in developing our cost declines over time. And we also kind of benchmark our PV costs, the cost per kilowatt DC installed, based on Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories Tracking the Sun report. So we're starting with historical cost data from Tracking the Sun, and we're using data from the NREL Annual Technology Baseline to project those costs. And it's a good thing to notice, point out here as well, and can be seen in the historical data, is that PV costs have actually kind of flattened in recent years, and between tariffs and supply constraints and the pandemic and everything, and the cost declines that solar PV has experienced in, say, the past decade is not what's happening right now, but I mean, ultimately, in the AEO reference case, costs do continue to decline through 2050. And then we also have our low renewables cost case and our high renewables cost case. In the low renewables cost case, we assume that the installed cost of solar PV is 40% lower than the reference case in 2050, by 2050. So it's a linear trend going downward. And then the high renewables cost case, PV system costs are held flat over time, so no cost declines through 2050. But we can see here, the commercial side, that those capital costs are affecting adoption of PV most in the commercial sector. And then on the residential side, it's driven a bit more by the fuel costs. In the low oil and gas supply case, fuel costs are electricity costs specifically are 12% higher than in the reference case. Another important thing to bear in mind here is that we do not currently model residential and commercial battery storage, behind the meter storage, but that is also one of those areas that we are focusing on and keeping an eye on, and we will adjust our models and find a way to incorporate those in the future. For non-PV technologies, such as combined heat and power and distributed wind, these account for 13% of commercial distributed generation capacity in 2020, but only 4% in 2050 in the reference case. So more PV is offsetting, PV is accommodating, or is accounting for, more of the share of commercial distributed generation capacity. Of the non-solar technologies, natural gas-fired CHP, namely microturbines, reciprocating engines, fuel cells, and conventional natural gas-fired turbines, the capacity there is expanding at an average of 1.1% per year. Incremental cost declines and performance improvements are driving this growth, despite the 0.2% per year increase in natural gas prices over the projection period. That is actually all I have right now. If you have any questions about the presentation, please feel free to contact me. For any questions about our buildings or transportation and industrial projections, our other demand sectors, you can reach out to our consumption and efficiency outlooks inbox, that second email address there. And as always, every year during the AEO production cycle, we have working group meetings for different sectors. And this AEO 2023 that will be coming up, we will have one working group meeting for buildings in the fall, and then as well the other sectors, the supply side sectors and the other demand sectors, there will be separate meetings for those. So I encourage you to participate if you are available and interested. Included here a number of different EIA products that that we use or that use AEO data. And finally, here are a number of buildings related reports that form assumptions and inputs into our residential and commercial buildings modeling. So thank you very much. Pass the torch back.
We had a couple questions I
Kevin.
just want to follow up. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
And I think we're going to follow up now, roll
Well,
right into a
Yeah, we just had
roundtable.
Eric. We had a couple questions that weren't addressed
Oh, okay.
in the chat. There's a follow up. I gave an answer to a question. Someone asked, where do electric vehicles falls, and do they fall into MELS? And I think I correctly said they don't. Right? It's captured in the transportation module. Is that correct, Kevin?
Yes, that is correct.
Right. So that was correct. And then the follow up question is, does EIA back out consumption from at-home charging from their purchase of electricity? So do you have any way of backing that out for what you're modeling?
So yeah, all of our EV related consumption is characterized in the in our transportation modeling as part of our AEO, and we do have, again, in the AEO release slides, there's some more information about the EV adoption over time and the consumption from that.
I guess
Yeah, I
I
think-
think the answer to the question is it's not. I think it's not backed out. There's some small little bit, right, of delivered or purchased energy that's used to charge electric vehicles, right? That's kind of embedded in the data you're using, and there's no way to really back that out.
Right. Yeah, that is correct.
Great, thanks. I think that's Rich. Was that everything? Did we miss anything?
That's mostly it.
One thing I did write down, I don't think we got to this. Are portable air cleaners modeled as an increasing end use due to COVID and wildfire smoke?
That is one of those areas that we are specifically looking into, working with contractors to find the effects of some of those end uses or the equipment, especially particularly in commercial ventilation. But as far as the portable air cleaners, we don't explicitly model those right now.
Great, thank you. All right, so I will take the ball back, so to speak, and put our slides back up. In slide mode. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes.
Good.
Great. All right. So what we're going to transition into now is this idea of kind of an open discussion roundtable about some of the stuff Kevin was talking about, and then also about how that information that him and his team and the EIA put out every year, how we use that information to put together these SAE spreadsheets, and some of the maybe issues you guys have, or how you use them, or how you calibrate them to best suit your needs in forecasting. So Stuart mentioned this earlier this morning. We've mentioned SAE a couple times, just for some people on the call that maybe aren't familiar with it. SAE stands for statistically adjusted end use. And if you've been coming to these meetings or sat in on a brown bag or two over the last probably 20 years, you've probably seen this graphic 100 times. But it does paint a good picture in terms of the SAE framework. So we like to think of, your consumption of electricity, whether it's a home or a business, is people are really using electricity in three ways. They're using it to cool their house, they're using it to heat their house, and they're using it for basically everything else. So those are the blue, the red, and the gray boxes. You can, I guess, ignore the green boxes on the far right for right now. And then we can further break down that cooling or that heating or that other into more detailed end uses from the information and the data that EIA puts out every year. So you can think of that as the top set of boxes. So this end use stock, this information that changes very slowly over time, we get that information from Kevin and his group. So we get things like the saturations of different end uses. So say for cooling, you might have central air conditioning, you could have heat pumps, you could have room air conditioners. And the percentage of homes that have that technology and how that changes over time, that's one piece of the equation. The other piece is how efficient is that equipment? Room air conditioners are probably not getting too much more efficient, but certainly heat pumps and central air conditioning, as that equipment becomes more and more efficient, it's going to use less and less electricity over time. So you can think of those top boxes as things that change very, very slowly over time as people change out equipment, as new homes are built, things like that changes slowly over time. For heating side, it's usually resistant heating, heat pumps. There's some secondary heating too. Again, the same idea, the saturation of homes that have that technology, how that changes over time, and then the efficiency of the technology. For all the other end uses, the things that are really not weather sensitive, we have things like water heating, your kitchen appliances, office equipment if we're talking about commercial buildings, and then random MLs with the MELs, what can I say that word? Miscellaneous electric loads. So the different saturations of all those end uses and the efficiency along with them. Of course, some of those end uses, like things like lighting and refrigeration, those would be in every home. But things like electric water heating or electric cooking, some percentage of the homes in your service territory may or may not have that stock. So that's the piece of the equation that changes very slowly over time. The second row of boxes is what we're calling utilization. So essentially, how much electricity is consumed by the things you have in your home, and that changes more seasonally and also maybe quarterly based on the things that are in the boxes there. So the predominant thing is the weather. So how many CDDs or HDDs happened or occurred in that month. That certainly impacts how much you utilize the equipment. Things like income, if we're talking about residential homes, maybe things like employment or GDP if we're talking about commercial building space. So those are the things that impact utilization on a more month-to-month or quarterly basis. So when we have all of those pieces of information based on really the data that the EIA puts out, we can construct these variables, this X cool, this X heat, and this X other. With these three variables, we have a very powerful tool of explaining exactly how people use electricity, and it captures all of the pieces that go into it. The stock and how efficient that stock is, and how much money people have, and the weather. It's all rolled into these variables that create a very robust model for explaining how a home or how a business uses electricity. The two boxes to the right, the solar and other what we'll call new technologies, those are something that has kind of come online in the last 5 to 10 years that may or may not be applicable depending on what part of the country you're in and the penetration of EVs or PVs. So those are the kind of two newer pieces that we're having to account for. And I think that's what hopefully we'll get into in this discussion is maybe how we are accounting for those two green boxes on the right, because those are the things that are kind of changing the most rapidly in the last couple of years. So why do we need to have this structured SAE framework? What's the need for it? So this graph is trying to kind of paint the picture of why we need that structured model. So what we've done here on this graph is put commercial sales, which is the red line, annual numbers, GDP, which is the dotted blue line, and then commercial electricity intensity. So that's kilowatt hours per square foot estimates, again, largely based on the EIA data. And these values have all been indexed to 2000 so that we can put them all on the same graph, because of course they're one's in megawatts, one's in megawatt hours, and one's in millions of dollars of GDP, something like that. But we've indexed them so we can put them all on the same graph to see how they're changing over time. And I think the thing that's important to recognize or see is that, say, through 2010 or 2011, GDP and commercial sales are basically moving in the same direction. So if you just had a simple model of commercial sales as a function of GDP, it might have worked pretty well through 2009 or 2010. But then starting in 2010, 2011, you see this divergence between the red line and the dotted blue line. Commercial sales are essentially flat while GDP has been growing. in, what's the missing piece? And we're saying the missing piece is you have to be able to capture this efficiency improvement, the intensity. So you see the intensity is declining over time, and that's what we're saying is kind of the missing piece of information. You need this idea of efficiency or capturing efficiency to be able to accurately understand why commercial sales are flat while GDP has been growing. So that's kind of the overall picture of why we're here today, or why the energy forecasting group started, what the SAE modeling approach is, and why we think it's important. So with that, we'd like to open it up to have questions and comments and discussions around anything that Kevin displayed and talked about, and how the information that he and his team put out every year go into the SAE spreadsheets that we put together, and how you use some of that information to do your modeling, and are there things that you need to supplement or do to capture things like PV or utility sponsored efficiency programs. So things that you have to do in addition to kind of the basic SAE spreadsheets. What do you need to do to make them work for you? And maybe some of the challenges you face either using them or things you've done to maybe make them work better for you. And I think, Paige, if we could not unmute everyone, but give everyone the ability to unmute themselves.
I have done that. And
Great,
so
great.
let's remind everybody, if you want to ask a question, try and raise your hand if you can get to that reaction button up on top there, or go ahead and type it in the chat, and Rich will help relay that answer if you're a little too shy or for some reason that doesn't work. And we can get started talking about some of these questions.
Hey, Mike, I suggest, what if we start with the bottom one? What challenges, if any, do you face using the SAE spreadsheets? This would be a good thing for, us and other people to understand.
We're always trying to improve them. I think in the last couple of years, we've added a few changes. We've made a few changes to the PV spreadsheet on the worksheets, and the EV spreadsheet on the worksheets. We try to add some more features and functionality to them to make them be more useful. But I'm sure there's some improvements we could make. So if anyone has any thoughts or wishes. Do we have any hands going up? Unfortunately, in this presentation mode, I can't quite see the hands. So
I have not seen any hands go up, Mike. So I encourage all you those out there that are using SAE spreadsheets. Oh, we do have a question coming from John Holmes. John, go ahead and unmute and ask your question. Yeah, we're not hearing you talk, John.
Let's see if I can find him and unmute him.
I think I can unmute you, John.
Why does it say he's not in the meeting?
Oh, he says he's in the meeting.
It does.
His hand flashed up.
I saw it.
He said his mic is
Ah,
It was grayed out until just this moment.
yeah.
All right, go ahead, John. What's your question?
Well, it has to do with the efficiencies that are out there. Are y'all are basing that on what's currently on the books for from DOE, or do you have a forecast of further improvements going into the future?
So what it's based on, and Kevin, feel free to jump in, but it's based on all known codes and standards that are on the books. So it could be a code or a standard that's going to will take effect in 2025, for instance, but it has to be a law as of today. That's how that works. So if something is potentially being debated, but not quite law yet, then that wouldn't be captured.
Okay, and there's no expectation that after what's being debated today, or is a law today, that there'll be a future efficiencies proposed after that. So there's a window where efficiencies are happening, and then the efficiencies run out, and it just carries on with whatever the last, as you saturate towards those best efficiencies, with no new efficiencies coming in. Am I following?
I think you're fair to say that I think what we've seen is, some of these forecasts that the spreadsheet that we put out go out to 2050. So we have improvements and things improve through 2025, 2030, maybe 2035, and then efficiency improvements kind of don't do anything different because there's just nothing on the books yet for that far out. Is that what you're getting at?
Kevin, do you want to answer that?
Sure, I think I can add a little bit more there. So, right, current energy efficiency standards, there are additional energy efficiency standards currently in the works to fulfill backlog of overdue standards. We do not currently account for those because they aren't finalized, they aren't laws on the books. But over time, you have stock turnover, so older, less efficient equipment is already being replaced by more efficient equipment that meets the most recent standards. And also, EIA will occasionally release side cases, issues in focus reports that look at the effects of extending minimum energy efficiency standards. That's not an analysis that we do every single AEO, but we have released kind of those extended standards analyses. For AEO 2022, we're going to look at, or we're going to release a report on extending federal tax credits, for instance. So if the ITCs were extended longer, or if energy efficiency federal energy efficiency incentives were extended beyond their current expirations, but not in the reference case. We don't assume future standards.
Yeah, this is Stuart. This is a interesting topic when you think about something like LEDs. If you go back 30 years when we started doing this, they weren't on the list of things to choose. And there was no like generalized technology improvement. So it was just this list, and it had incandescent and fluorescent and maybe different grades of those. So those forecasts really didn't foresee at all any of the lighting improvement that has in fact come out to be. And I think that's generally true in the future, that EIA isn't speculating about technology breakthroughs that are unproven and not on the market today, right? I mean, you know about some of those things in the work that you do towards standards improvement, where, with industry groups, you're looking at tweaks or changes that could be made, and what would that cost, and what would it save, and those sorts of things. But it really doesn't, until it's a proven technology, I don't really think it's on the list to choose from. Right.
Right. You could look at our technology projections as a bit more evolutionary rather than revolutionary. So just the assumption that existing equipment and technologies get more efficient over time, or costs reduce over time. So we do have those two dynamics, but can't anticipate every game changer, especially 30 years out.
Right. Interesting. Thank you so much. That clears some stuff up for me. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
One comment related to what you were saying with the challenges is description is not a big challenge, but having a definitions tab on the commercial spreadsheet similar to the way residential is set up would be helpful when helping others who are not as familiar with it to navigate through the spreadsheets.
Good point. That's an easy one.
Easy fix.
Nathan, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself? Looks like you were next in the queue. And if you can't, let me try and unmute you for you. Can you talk now, Nathan?
Well, that's the quietest I've ever heard Nathan.
Testing, 1, 2.
You got it.
All right. So TVA is just going to beat up on y'all for a second. I'm going to follow up on John's question. So several years ago, I want to say it was 2018, there was an extended policies AEO, as well as y'all even produced SAE worksheets around that extended policy scenario. Any do I need to go call my congressman or something like that? We found those to be very helpful, and in some of our risk planning and even our base case a couple of years. So I do want to put a plug in for those extended policies.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Certainly share that with the team. Obviously, no future AEO side cases have not been chosen yet, and there's always competing focus, but it certainly is an important one. So thank you.
Great. We have another question coming in from Arthur. Arthur, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Let's see. Hi, everyone. So just to, before I get to my question, I want to comment on the previous question. And I think it helps if we distinguish between the marginal efficiency and the stock efficiency. So if you have new Energy Star air conditioners whose standards run out, let's say 5 years. And so you've got new equipment over the next 5 years. And then let's say that efficiency increase halts. It's going to take a number of years before you change out the entire stock of housing. And this also applies to lighting in the commercial sector or other efficiency changes, refrigeration, motor stuff. So the fact that the AEO efficiency trends may level out, say, after 5 or 6 years, doesn't mean that the efficiency trend in the SAE spreadsheet is going to level out. It doesn't. It will continue to decrease over time. And the reason for that is because the overall stock average efficiency is going to gradually improve as a greater and greater share of the 2025 efficiency equipment gets rolled into future stock. Secondly, there isn't anything that will prevent you in your own SAE spreadsheet from layering in an additional trend beyond a certain point. So you can customize that section of the spreadsheet to include your state's policy initiatives or your own utilities policy initiatives. So I think the framework that's established there, stock accounting, et cetera, allows you to understand how to make some changes to your trends that may reflect what is going on in Tennessee or California that's more specific than what might be in each of those DOE regions as a whole. So that's hopefully that gives some, I'll say, power to the user to go ahead and modify those trends on their own. But from a marginal perspective, just because, just to repeat, just because the marginal trend might not be continued by AEO doesn't mean that the efficiency trend in the SAE spreadsheet is going to stop. So my question is for Kevin, and since we started doing our electrification work in New York, we've focused on the Mid-Atlantic estimate for the electric space heat UEC. And I always thought that it looked a little small, especially in comparison to the gas UEC, once you account for conversion of units and efficiency. And so we tried this year putting in our best estimate of an electric whole house furnace whose usage would be the equivalent of a gas furnace converted to kilowatt hours without the efficiency losses up the stack, right? And I thought, oh, great, we've got this quote right sized, and the SAE parameters, the betas that are part of the SAE framework, gave me an unwelcome surprise. They cut my usage to a third of what I thought it should be, which more or less matched what was in the Mid-Atlantic data in the first place. And I said, what's going on here? Why is the electric UEC, which is supposed to be the household value, why is that so small in comparison to what the equivalent gas usage would be? BTUs per BTUs, kilowatt for kilowatt hours, UEC should be a UEC. And the only insight I got was when we reviewed New York's residential survey results, similar to REX. They had an on-site component that listed the capacity in kilowatts as well as the capacity of furnaces and BTUs per hour. And the electric capacities were 1/3 roughly of the gas capacities, again, accounting for units. So my takeaway is could it be the case that many of the so-called electric furnaces are really not for the whole house, but they're really on a supplemental basis? So I thought I would pose this to Kevin and ask, what is your sense of what the electric UEC is, residential sector? Should it be comparable to the equivalent sized capacity of a gas furnace? That's what we've been kind of focused on. And the only sense I can make of it is even when you have electric heating in a house, it's nowhere near the full capacity compared to what a gas furnace would do. So that's kind of my comment and question, and a puzzle that we've been working over for a number of years. We believe that UEC, but only because the capacity is much less than you'd need to heat the whole house.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Arthur. I appreciate that. Our UECs for the AEO are developed from the Residential Energy Consumption Survey. And so if you want to send me an email kind of summarizing your concerns, we can speak with the REX folks and see if there's something that we need to figure out there. But otherwise, I mean, it's possible that there could be, we do model secondary space heating as kind of a separate, less detailed end use versus the total space heating where we compete, like furnaces and boilers and heat pumps, things like that. So I'd have to look into that more, but if you want to send me a message, we can take a look at that.
I will do that. We did find that the heat pump numbers that are in Mid-Atlantic are pretty close to our own heat pump estimates. New York is about half of Mid-Atlantic households. So we were pleased to see that, but the electric resistance heating is a head scratcher. So hey, Stuart.
That's been around for a long time, that we've seen it in conditional demand studies. When you look at, if it's a resistance heat, you get this UEC, and then you go to the heat pump and you expect a value, like half as big, and it's always just as big. And so I think what happens with the resistance is, I'm not sure about furnace because but resistance like baseboard, you don't heat the whole house. You heat the rooms you're in. It's expensive, so there's a price component. And the homes, I think, are smaller, and maybe not for the heat pump homes, but the resistance baseboard homes are a little smaller and probably better. When they were built, they put in better insulation because they were going to put in electric heating. So I'm surprised that it's a factor of a third, though. But we've always seen that with like gas is the big number, electric resistance is in the middle, and then heat pumps is right at the same as electric resistance, you know, based on the homes that they're in and the conditions that they're in. So
Yes, Stuart, I think that's a lot of it is that, you know, with resistance, which is, you know, the primary electric in use, it's not like you got every room on in the house. You know, it's just too expensive to do that.
well, yeah, but Arthur's saying even the capacity is smaller. So even if you know, it's almost like it couldn't be enough capacity to keep the house as warm, unless it's much better, you know, much better insulated.
Or that they've got, you know, other fuels heating the house in addition to electric.
Can hear me or not, but I don't know if y'all, I missed some of the conversation about this, but y'all did touch on the fact that the heat strips come on the heat pumps when it gets below like 32 or a certain temperature. So that's going to make the heat pumps obviously not be running as efficiently. So those are 4.5 kW heat strips. So that definitely adds on. So that might offset this, what you might be expecting for efficiency.
Yeah, good point.
We have any other hands?
Hey, Mike, why don't you talk or start the conversation a little bit about where to put those electric vehicles in your SAE model or treat them outside the model?
Sure. Actually, before I do that, I was going to, let me stop presenting this and jump to something. I wanted to show everyone, if they're not familiar with the transportation module, what that looks like and maybe where they can find that, because it's a good source. Let me share this. So if you go to EIA's website and go to the annual energy outlook, you can get on this, I think it's called the interactive data view or data viewer. And if you go down here to tables and publication, you know, most of the data we're using is in, you know, electric power. No, sorry, it's in, so down here, it's in residential sector, it's in commercial, but there's a whole transportation sector. And in here, there are a number of tables that show the vehicle types and the stock. And whenever it says vehicle stock by technology type, if you look in that table, it will have a breakdown of the type of vehicle, you know, 100, 200 mile, 300 mile electric vehicles, and it can show you consumption. Other tables will show you miles driven, things like that. So all of that is pretty good information if you're looking for EV related information from the EIA. But let me jump back to the slides.
Thanks, Mike. If you ever want to be an honorary EIA team member, you got it.
So the question Eric asked was, how do we incorporate electric vehicles into the SAE model? We have now, or a couple of years ago, we added an EV tab to the SAE spreadsheet. And the tab works similar in the sense where you start with households, and number of vehicles per household, some estimate of annual miles driven, and then some efficiency number or a kilowatt hour per vehicle per year number. And you can essentially either get to a total kilowatt hours, or you can get to a kilowatt hour per customer or per household. So the question is then, what do you do with that information and how do you incorporate it into your SAE model? What we've found so far is that the electric vehicles, although there might be a little bit of data that's embedded in your historical sales data, if you have strong EVs in your area, there's really no way to isolate that piece of information. If you were to drop the EV sales or EV per customer as a right-hand side variable in your residential average use model, it's probably not going to be significant, or it's not going to give you the right sign, just because, you know, there's just not enough historical EV sales in the data to isolate it, which might be different than PV. You know, solar's been around long enough in certain areas, you probably could isolate a solar impact. But electric vehicles, you know, we found that's very difficult to isolate it and embed it in the SAE model. So generally, our approach has been to essentially layer it on after the fact. You know, so you've done your residential sales model, and then, you know, essentially what you're going to do is layer on whatever your EV forecast is. And that forecast could come out of the SAE spreadsheet, again, based on the households and the miles driven and whatever other assumptions you want. But we've found, at least at this point, it's easiest to layer it on after the fact, opposed to trying to model it or embed it in the SAE model. At least that's how we've found. I don't know if others have had other experience or have had luck. The other alternative, you could try to force it into something like X other, just embed it in that variable, so that it's not a separate variable in the model, but put the EV sales in something like X other. That could be something you could do, but we've found that at least to layer it on is the best approach.
Mike, related to that, Laura Ortega asks, does EIA have information on heavy duty EV and commercial usage?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe, I know, Kevin, that's not your area, but do you know if the transportation module has that? I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't believe we do.
We can add Erin to the chat, or she can unmute herself if she's still on.
Erin's name is still there. It's
So you're talking basically fleet vehicles, right? Delivery vehicles, Amazon vehicles, that type of thing, right?
I'm on. I had trouble unmuting. Sorry about that. I do have a 4:30 meeting, but before I go, 4:30 Eastern time. So we do have electric heavy duty vehicles in the model, but they don't get chosen quite often right now. Part of that has to do with the regionality that's in the model right now. We're sharing out from national for heavy duty vehicles. However, for light duty vehicles, this past AEO, we did include a new regionalization and battery model so that we're better picking up the regional sales of EVs for light duty vehicles. But for heavy duty, they're in there, they just don't get chosen.
But hey, Erin, what's heavy duty? What are those Amazon vans that come around? Would they be heavy duty?
I'm not the right person to ask. We need Michael Dwyer here, who gave a presentation a few years ago. So it goes up to 18-wheelers and huge things, right? Buses, 18-wheelers, that kind of thing. But as far as the lower bound for that, that is in the assumptions document that's available online with the AEO. So I'm going to refer you to that. And with that, sorry, I have to sign off. So I'll be back tomorrow, though. Thanks.
Thanks, Erin.
Bye, Erin.
Mike, I think there was a question from Ness from Central Electric in South Carolina. Ness, if you want to unmute and you want to ask your question, you can go ahead.
Yeah, my question is with the solar. Sort of wondering, like, what would be the best way to sort of untangle like the peak impacts of residential solar? It's a question that I get a lot, especially since it's related to revenue collection.
I think whenever you're talking about peak impacts, you need to start looking at 8760 hourly load shapes, and you need to take your residential energy forecast or sales forecast and then put that underneath a residential shape or system shape, and do the same with PV. So you need to have some idea of the class shape and then the technology shape. That's really, I think, the only way to deal with its impact on shapes, because as you add more and more EVs or even PVs, that shape's going to change over time, and it's going to impact your system shape. So I think you really need to start looking at hourly load shapes.
And just for a quick closing plug for Friday, those are things that Alina President's going to talk about a little bit on Friday morning session.
I do think we're over time, right? We're supposed to end at 4:30.
We are a little over time, so but we're definitely still capturing what we're talking about. If you know, a few of you want to stay on and still talk with Kevin and Mike and the team here, we can answer a few more questions. We have some answer about medium and heavy duty. Is any vehicle over 8,500 in weight?
Well, since we're talking about that, there was a story I had just sent to Eric and Mike, I think the other day, about a Hummer vehicle, an electric Hummer vehicle that costs $100,000, weighs 9,000 pounds, and can go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. That was
I think the term medium duty gets confusing, right? Because any vehicle you can purchase at a dealership, whether it's a large F-350 diesel truck, those are actually considered light duty vehicles, even though the name of the vehicle is heavy duty. I think in terms of EIA's classification, those are all still light duty vehicles, I believe. But yes, Rich. So Rich was talking about this very expensive $100,000 Hummer electric vehicle that has just been released.
9,000 pounds in 3 seconds. Nothing can go wrong with that, huh?
I think it's something along the lines of 1,000 horsepower.
And if you've got $100,000 lying around, well, it can be.
Well, actually, I think they're all sold. So even if you had 100,000, it's too late. You have to wait.
You're on the waiting list. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I guess we'll let everybody go. I see a lot of people have dropping off and are dropping off because everybody's calendars are always booked. And so we will see everybody back hopefully tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock Pacific. And thanks so much, Kevin, for the presentation today.
Yes, thank you,
Thanks a lot.
Kevin.
Lots
Thank
of
you,
questions.
everyone.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.